2 years ago, I had a realization that I was being a massive hypocrite. And that realization has genuinely changed my business and my life over the last couple of years. And I feel like there is a real lesson for me in that journey of intentionality and what intentionality looks like when we address it across not just the things that other people can see or that feel really obvious, but actually every area of our business and also of who we are personally. This might be a bit of a chatty episode, but it's definitely got me thinking, with it being the kind of 2-year anniversary of that realization for me, about the journey that realization has taken me on, what it's taken to get to where I am today, and really the impact of that journey as well. How many times can I say journey in one intro? Let's find out. Let's start with the realization itself. So it was September 2023. And I know that really clearly because it was off the back of my month off. I take August off every year. And what that generally means is that September is when I have my kind of realizations and make big changes, because I've had this kind of break. I often get, clarity when I'm away from the business. And it's amazing to step away from something fully and then come back to it with fresh eyes. You can kind of see things a lot more clearly. And I remember having this realization in September that I was just being a massive hypocrite. And I was basically lying to myself. Now, what I mean by this is in my work, with my clients, in my content, and in the things that I kind of did and was doing externally, was all about intentionality, right? Like doing things with intention. And when I say doing things with intention and intentionality, what I just mean is like seeing the connection between how you act and the results that you have, connecting the dots of those two things and then acting in line with that. I don't think intentionality is about hustling or like pushing as much as you can or creating growth at any cost. It's actually just going like, okay, what do I want? And how do I show up with that in mind? How do I just keep my priorities and my vision at the forefront? And that was something that I really believed in and that I definitely lived in a lot of parts of my business and my life. But I had this realization 2 years ago that there were so many other parts of my business and my life where that intentionality was just being completely left. And I wasn't acting in line with what was important to me and what my vision was. I remember thinking, if someone followed me around for a week, I would be really embarrassed by what they would see a large percentage of the time. And what I mean by that is I would have been embarrassed by behind the scenes, the lack of organization in my business, the lack of intentionality I was having with the way that I structured my day, with the way that I, set myself up, with the habits that I had when I was in work mode. And I also felt that from a personal perspective of who I was showing up as when the laptop was shut or I wasn't in work mode was also really different from the person that I was when I was in the business a lot of the time. It was this feeling of almost living a bit of a double life where I was like, I feel like there's this one part of me where I'm all about like intention and like, messy action, but like show up for what's important to you and like, trust the process and be patient and go for it. And in many ways I adopted that, but then in many ways I was doing the complete opposite. It's not just for me about my personal habits and health, but that's a really easy example to give where, in business, I really understood in a lot of ways, like the action I take affects my experience and affects my results. And I have to be patient and I can't expect results too quickly and I need to like trust the process. But then I was that person in my personal life where like, if I wasn't good at something, I'd just be like, well, I'm rubbish at it and I can't do it. I didn't adopt that messy action. I didn't let myself be a beginner. Or I'd put in work to achieve something, and if I hadn't achieved it within 3 days, I'd be like, well, I can't do it. In my business, I was all about this like slow growth and trust the process and like just keep going. And then in so many other areas, I was acting in a complete opposite way. And I wonder if anyone can relate to this, but I really had this feeling of like, I feel a bit like Hannah Montana. Like I've got these two completely different states of being. And I think for a long time in my business, that felt fine. It felt normal. If anything, I probably told myself like, oh, they balance each other out. In some ways in business, I act like this so that in other ways in business and my life, I can act the opposite way and they need to kind of contrast each other. But I remember when I had that feeling of like, if someone saw how I was working and showing up behind the scenes, I would feel embarrassed. I would feel like they were seeing a part of me that I wasn't proud of, that didn't align with who I wanted to be. That was a real turning point for me. And I guess much like I approach with anything in business, I see anything unknown as an opportunity to experiment where you don't know unless you find out. And so I had this moment September 2 years ago where I was like, right, well, let's think about changing that and we'll give it a go. If it doesn't feel worth it, maybe it has to be the case that these two things balance each other out. Maybe it can't be that I can be intentional in every area of my life and business, and that's actually not for me. I say that out loud now, laughing of like, well, 2 years on, it turns out it is good for me to be intentional in every single area of my business and life as much as I can. But that's how I felt back then. And that realization has genuinely changed my life. It's made the business so much more successful and sustainable. It's made me personally just a much better person, feel better. There's so many benefits that I could talk about. But I guess what I want to talk a bit about is kind of the journey of that shift, and for anyone that's maybe in a similar position, like what it looks like to really adopt that kind of 360 intentionality. The first thing that I would say, and I think this is true for any kind of change, is that you've got to adopt the action before the identity. Looking back, one of the big reasons that I was stuck in these kind of bad habits, and I want to say I'm not just talking about my personal habits and health here. There was also stuff in the business that, if I'm being honest with myself, and I am being honest with myself quite literally with you on the internet as well, weren't up to scratch. You know, there was a lack of structure around my day. There was chaos in my inbox. There was a lack of organization behind the scenes in the business, which I don't think many people would have known about. Maybe a few team members could see it or feel it. Maybe some people did feel it as an external customer or client, which is, you know, like my worst nightmare. But I kind of felt like it was like my little secret. Like there was just this like bits of chaos in the behind the scenes of my business. And changing that really had to start with me acting like the person that did those things. Does that make any sense? I feel like when all of that, like when it was chaos and when I wasn't really acting in alignment in a lot of ways in the business, it was because I felt like, well, that's just me. I've always done it like this, or this is just how it kind of happens naturally. So like, this is who I am. And if you think about the kind of connection, right, between like your identity, who you see yourself as, that is the biggest controller over your actions. Your actions then give you your results. That then informs your identity. So because my actions were of someone who was, you know, disorganized and unintentional and a bit chaotic, my results were then telling me that. And then those results were just reinforcing my identity that like, well, this is just me and this is how I am. And I had to break that cycle by almost adopting the identity before adopting the action and getting the results. It's the same with any kind of change, right? Almost like you have to kind of believe it's possible and see yourself as someone that does that before it happens. This sounds so simple maybe or silly, but I really had to say to myself, like, I am someone who keeps on top of their emails. I am someone who replies to people even if it's not urgent in a good time frame. I am someone who, you know, doesn't sit on my phone at any opportunity throughout the day just to doom scroll. I had to believe that that was a version of me that could exist or that I cared about in order for the action to then follow. 2 years on, it definitely feels like that cycle has completed itself a good few times and the identity shifted. What that means is it's now easier. You know, all of that intentionality that I now feel across my business, across my life, feels easier because it feels ingrained. It feels like there's identity to back it up. But the change at the very start is the hardest. The second thing I want to say as well, which I kind of wish I'd said earlier in this episode, but I'm hoping you know me by now and it's never about perfection, is that it's also about letting it be messy. It's not as black and white as like, oh, 2 years ago, I was this, you know, hypocrite who was unintentional in certain ways and like not really like showing up how I wanted to behind the scenes. And now I'm like perfect. And it's this 360 intentionality all the time. Obviously, it's not that. I'm a human before I'm a business owner. We're not robots. It's not about this perfect intentionality, but it's instead about this constant aim for as much intentionality as possible. It's letting it be messy, letting it be non-linear, letting there be periods where I do maybe go back to some of those previous ways. But the key thing here is that we get back to it as soon as we can. I talk a lot in my core program on it and with my clients about this idea of bounce back rate over consistency. Over the last 2 years, it's not been a case of just perfectly changing everything, and it definitely didn't happen quickly. It's the constant bounce back of going like, okay, no, I'm back to that chaotic email vibe. Right, how do we get back to it? Okay, I'm back to those like really awful personal habits or just not treating myself well. Right, how do we get back to it? Expect it to be messy. I think I'd always thought People that had this real intentionality in every area of their life and business, they found it easy and they did it perfectly. And I probably used those assumptions as an excuse because I was like, well, I don't find it easy and I can't do it perfectly, so I won't do it at all. But actually, if we let it feel quite messy, quite human, it suddenly feels more doable and more helpful. The other thing I'd share is kind of the third point here as well, before I talk just a bit about kind of the benefits for me of doing this, is that I think it's also that annoying self-discipline over motivation. The reality is who you are behind the scenes doesn't get, directly seen in terms of there being accountability. And I think that was probably a big part of it for me, was I was kind of like, oh, I don't have the energy to exercise self-discipline in all these other areas. I'll just exercise it where I feel like it really matters. And for a while that worked. But now feeling the difference of running a business where that intentionality is everywhere, even where people can't see it, is huge. And it takes self-discipline to do that, right? There's not natural motivation because there's not that feeling of something will immediately be seen or go wrong if I don't do this. But I can definitely say now, all of those things behind the scenes that don't get seen, quote unquote, they do get seen, they do get felt, but just maybe not as directly or as immediately as you might think. Nowadays, feeling intentional in most areas, most of the time, again, it's imperfect, of my business, of my personal life, it's just made the biggest difference. The business is so much more solid because I've got all of those other habits nailed. Because everything behind the scenes is as organized as it can be. There's less chaos. There's more of a feeling of structure. I've almost done those things for me. And it's that feeling, isn't it, of like, oh, maybe things matter even if they're just for me. Even if it's not going to be seen by others, it makes a difference. I feel so much more confident about my goals and the things that I'm aiming for because the infrastructure of the business is there. James Clear says, we don't rise to the level of our goals, you fall to your systems and your habits. Because the business's systems and habits are better, more intentional, I'm able to hit those goals more confidently. And the changes in my personal life have really made a difference, both personally and in the business. I am now really proud of the person that I am in every minute of my day. And actually that is something that I never used to feel. Like I said, I felt embarrassed at the thought of people seeing me in different areas of my day and my life. And actually feeling really proud of who you are, I don't think is this fluffy fun extra. Like that feels really good. There's such a sense of confidence and identity and self-trust, I think, that comes from that. And also just in general, treating myself better, not being, really good with my mindset in business, but then just completely losing it with my personal health, has meant that I am more resilient, healthier, stronger, able to be a better business owner, able to kind of, keep going even when it feels tough, and also to have real pride and achievement of who I am outside of work. I used to be completely tied to my business's success in terms of my personal identity. And whilst I don't think those two things will ever completely separate, I do nowadays feel much more centered, much more level of like, oh, I'm a bit less stressed if the business isn't doing so well, because actually I have this sense of identity and being someone that I like outside of business as well. It's not all about like, who am I in a business capacity, and all the other versions of my identity don't matter. There's this personal identity that's formed through those habits as well. I know this episode has probably been a bit of a rambly one, but it's something that I think about a lot in general, but especially at this time of year when it kind of hits the anniversary of that big change in my life. I definitely didn't know in September 2023 what that realization really meant, but now looking back, it's something that made such a difference for me. And so I would just encourage you to maybe ask yourself that question of like, if people followed you around for a day, for a week, are there parts of maybe how you're showing up in the areas that people can't always see that perhaps you wouldn't be as proud of, or that perhaps you wish could look a little bit different? And maybe just an invitation to think about what could it look like to start shifting those things. Again, it's never going to feel like overnight change. It's never going to be perfectly consistent or, going from one end of the spectrum to the other. It's about that just constant thought of like, what does it look like to be that bit more intentional? Because I've seen it firsthand. The more intentional I've been in the habits that nobody can see, the better my business has grown, the better I have felt as a business owner. And genuinely, that intentionality in a 360 way has changed my life. So would love for you to reflect on that if it feels helpful for you. I do also have a free 10-minute masterclass which unpacks some of the key principles and mindsets that I believe as a business owner is really important in seeing growth. So if you enjoy this chat around the more kind of, I guess it's a bit more mindset, it's more like the stuff that people don't see. It's less just like do this hack or do this blueprint, and more like how are you showing up? What is the connection between your approach and your business's growth? Then head to the link in the show notes. I'll link that masterclass there. It's basically the key principles that I adopt as a business owner that all of my successful clients adopt as well. So go and have a watch of that if that feels helpful for you. But thank you for tuning into this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this slightly rambly episode. Hopefully this has made sense for you. And make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you're listening, because I'll be back in your ears next week.